My name is Jack. I had always believed in second chances, but the truth is, after everything that happened, I wasn't sure I believed in anything anymore. The past year had been a blur of failures, betrayals, and shattered dreams. A business I had poured my heart and soul into crumbled, leaving nothing but debt and regret in its wake. I thought I could outrun it all, but no matter how far I ran, my past seemed to follow me like a shadow, creeping into every corner of my life. When the opportunity came up to take a job as an archivist at a prestigious university library, I saw it as my escape. A fresh start, the chance to rebuild not just my career but my life. Maybe I could find peace in the quiet halls of ancient books, away from the noise of the world that had come crashing down around me. The ad had been simple. The position sounded almost too good to be true. Head archivist at a renowned university, responsible for cataloging rare collections and managing some of the oldest records in the country. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And more importantly, it was in a city far from where I'd spent the last few years picking up the pieces of a broken life. The decision to move wasn't easy. I'd left behind friends, a city that had been my home for far too long, and the remnants of a life I wasn't ready to let go of. But something in me yearned for change, yearned for distance, for the hope of something simpler, something that didn't come with the weight of my mistakes. So, I packed up the few belongings that remained of my life, left behind the apartment I had struggled to afford, and made my way to the city where I'd start again. The journey felt like I was running away, but I convinced myself that I wasn't running from my past. I was simply running toward a new future. I arrived in the new city with a mix of anticipation and dread. The university was everything I had imagined. Massive stone buildings that looked like they had been there for centuries, tall spires reaching into the sky like the fingers of an ancient hand. The campus was beautiful, almost overwhelmingly so. It had a weight to it, a sense of history that seemed to seep from the cracks in the pavement and the moss-covered walls. I wasn't sure what I expected from the job. Something mundane, perhaps. A few years of quiet work in the archives, cataloging dusty volumes, filing old records, and maybe, if I was lucky, finding a sense of peace among the pages of books long forgotten by time. It seemed simple enough, a job in a place where I could blend in and let the world forget about my mistakes. But the library, in its cold grandeur, had a strange, unsettling energy about it. There was something different about it, something that tugged at my mind every time I walked through its towering doors. The hallways were narrow, filled with thick wooden shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The scent of old paper, dust, and leather lingered in the air, and the creak of the wooden floors under my boots felt like they echoed in a way that was almost unnatural. I should have expected that something this beautiful, this ancient, would hold its own mysteries. But I wasn't prepared for how much of it would begin to seep into my thoughts, like a slow poison. The first few days on the job were uneventful. I spent most of my time in the main library halls, organizing shelves, making a catalog of the rare books, and ensuring everything was accounted for. The job itself wasn't hard, but there was a sense of distance between me and the world around me. I was there, physically present, but emotionally distant, a man hiding behind his work in an attempt to escape everything else. Then, I was assigned to the archives, an area of the library that was far more secluded than the main floors. The moment I set foot in that section, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The archives were tucked away in the heart of the library's underground levels. A labyrinth of narrow hallways, dim lighting, and towering bookshelves filled with volumes dating back centuries. The air felt thick, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. There was a chill down there that seemed to have nothing to do with the temperature. But I couldn't deny that something about it intrigued me. I remember the first time I wandered down there, long after the sun had set, and the library had grown quiet. The quiet was almost oppressive. The only sounds were the distant murmur of students studying upstairs and the rhythmic tapping of my shoes on the cold marble floors. It was a strange feeling, being down there alone. I found myself becoming drawn to the deeper parts of the archives, where no one else seemed to go. The shelves in those darker corners were lined with rare, Ancient books that hadn't seen the light of day for decades, their bindings cracked and weathered with age. I could feel the weight of their knowledge pressing down on me, and it was both overwhelming and oddly comforting. The deeper I explored, the more I began to sense that the library wasn't just a place of knowledge. It was a place of secrets, secrets that the building itself seemed to guard closely. I began to notice strange details I had missed at first. Books that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, shadows that lingered just a little too long in the corners of the room, and an unexplainable coldness in the air that seemed to follow me wherever I went. One night, as I ventured further into the bowels of the library than I had before, I stumbled upon a section that I hadn't even realized existed. A small, almost hidden alcove tucked away at the farthest end of the archives. There, standing before me, was a thick, leather-bound book that seemed to be calling out to me, despite the eerie silence of the room. I had to know what it was. The book was unlike anything I had seen in all my time at the university. Its cover was dark, almost black, and the edges were worn, as though it had been handled 1,000 times. But there was something about it, something unsettling, that made me hesitate. I told myself it was nothing, just another old book. But even as I dismissed the feeling, I couldn't shake the nagging sensation that something wasn't right. The next few days passed without incident, but the memory of the book stayed with me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its cover. Every time I passed the alcove in the archives, I felt a strange pull toward it. It was as if the book was calling to me, waiting for me to open it. And then, on one particularly quiet evening, when the library was nearly empty and the lights were dimmed, I found myself standing before it again. I reached out, my fingers brushing the worn cover. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I was about to uncover something that would change everything. Little did I know, the library, its walls, its books, its shadows, was hiding far more than just ancient knowledge. It was guarding something much darker, something that would soon start to haunt my every step. The first few days at the university library were quiet, almost too quiet. I expected the usual bustle of students, the noise of footsteps echoing through long hallways, and the soft murmur of conversations among scholars. But the library had an eerie stillness, a sense that time moved more slowly here. Even though the outside world was filled with noise and chaos, within these walls, there was a palpable silence that felt as if it had been building for centuries. On the surface, everything about the library was impressive. The soaring Gothic architecture, the massive stone columns that seemed to hold up the sky, the enormous windows that allowed streams of golden light to pour into the space during the day. It was the kind of place you could get lost in, not just physically, but mentally. The library was a temple of knowledge, and I had quickly come to understand that its size and grandeur were meant to impress, to awe, and to intimidate. But there was something else here, something beneath the surface that made my skin crawl every time I stepped deeper into its halls. The main floor, where the public and students were allowed to roam, was beautiful, almost calming in its quiet elegance. I spent my first few days cataloging the modern collections, handling books that were relatively new, no more than a few decades old. But as I explored further into the building, I began to notice something odd about the architecture, something that seemed to defy logic. The library, I learned, had 5 floors above ground, each one filled with books, records, and manuscripts. But these floors were just the tip of the iceberg. Below, hidden beneath the polished marble floors, lay the real heart of the library. 5 more levels underground, some of them forgotten, others so deeply buried that few people, even the staff, knew about them. The basement levels were vast, stretching far beyond what anyone could easily access. Curiosity, of course, led me to explore. It was on the 3rd day, after the library had closed for the evening, that I first found the door. Hidden behind a forgotten row of old encyclopedias and tucked into an alcove that barely seemed to exist, there was a narrow, unmarked door. At first, I thought it might just be a storage closet, another one of the library's countless little rooms filled with old supplies. But as I stepped closer, I saw something else, an engraving in the wood. Faded, worn by time, but still visible, a symbol, like an ancient rune, etched into the surface. I didn't know why I felt so drawn to it. Maybe it was my natural curiosity, my need to explore things that were out of reach. Or perhaps it was just the feeling that something in the library was calling me. Whatever it was, I couldn't resist the pull. I reached for the handle, hesitating for a moment. Then I pushed. The door creaked open with an unsettling groan, and what I saw beyond it made my heart skip a beat. A narrow staircase descended into the unknown. I had already been told that the library's archives were extensive, but what lay below seemed to stretch even further than I could comprehend. The air felt different down there, thick and heavy like something was pressing against me from all sides. The lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with a mind of their own. I knew I shouldn't have gone further. Something about the place felt wrong, like a part of the library that was never meant to be found. But I couldn't turn back now. My curiosity was a force too strong to resist. I stepped onto the first staircase, and the floorboards groaned beneath my weight, as if the entire building was sighing under the strain. Each step was heavy, the air growing cooler with every inch I descended. The faint hum of the library's main lights above faded as I moved deeper into the bowels of the building, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in from every direction. As I descended further, I noticed the walls, which had been made of smooth stone upstairs, began to change. They became uneven, cracked, and dark, with jagged edges as though the library had grown in layers, each one built upon the remnants of the past. The further I went down, the more it felt like I was walking into the bones of the building itself. The temperature dropped noticeably as I reached the first subterranean level. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, suddenly aware of the chill that seemed to seep from the very walls. The staircase eventually led to a long hallway lined with doors, each one locked, or so it seemed. There were no labels, no signs, just rows of heavy wooden doors that seemed to lead into endless darkness. I was beginning to regret my curiosity when I noticed something unusual. The floor. It wasn't the polished marble I had seen above. It was covered in dust, old and thick, like no one had bothered to walk down this corridor for years. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty hall. My eyes scanned the surrounding walls, taking in the eerie, abandoned atmosphere. The sense that I was intruding on something long forgotten was overwhelming. One door at the far end of the hallway caught my attention. Unlike the others, this one was slightly ajar, and the light from the hallway flickered weakly through the crack. I felt drawn to it, the urge to investigate compelling me forward despite my better judgment. I hesitated for a moment, listening for any sounds from beyond the door. But all I heard was the quiet hum of the old electrical system, the faint buzz of a light bulb somewhere in the distance. When I pushed the door open, I was greeted with a smell, stale, musty, and faintly metallic, as though the room hadn't been disturbed for decades. It was a small, dimly lit room, filled with towering shelves of books. But what caught my eye wasn't the books themselves. It was the room's centerpiece, a massive wooden desk covered in dust, as if someone had just abandoned their work there. On the desk sat a single book, its leather cover dark and worn. The pages, though, were exposed, yellowed and brittle, as if they had been pulled from the rest of the book. The sight sent a chill through me, a sense of unease crawling down my spine. I approached cautiously, my eyes drawn to the open pages. But the words were unlike anything I had ever seen before. They weren't Latin or any of the usual languages I was familiar with. They were symbols, twisted and unfamiliar. It almost looked like a code, something that shouldn't have been there at all. But it wasn't the strange writing that troubled me. It was the faint glow that seemed to emanate from the pages, a pale, sickly light that flickered just under the surface. I reached out slowly, hesitating for a moment, then ran my fingers over the pages. The book felt cold to the touch, almost impossibly cold, as though it had been frozen in time. Before I could pull my hand away, a sudden chill ran through the room, and the lights above flickered violently. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, as if the very atmosphere was alive with something ancient and unfathomable. I felt a presence, a weight that pressed down on me, suffocating me, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know what to do. Something in the back of my mind urged me to leave, to walk away from the book, from the room, from the library itself. But I couldn't move. I couldn't tear myself away from that book, from the sensation of something dark and powerful reaching out to me. It was then that I heard the faintest of whispers. It was soft at first, just barely audible like a distant murmur. But as I stood there, frozen in place, the whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it was all I could hear. It felt like the book was speaking directly to me, its voice echoing through my mind, pulling at my deepest fears and regrets. I slammed the book shut. The room went dead silent, and the oppressive weight lifted from my shoulders, but the air felt wrong. It was like I had awoken something that should have remained hidden. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't answer. What was that? What was the book? And why did I feel like I had just uncovered something that was never meant to be found? The first time I held the book of regrets in my hands, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. It wasn't just another dusty tome lost in the depths of the archives. It was something else. Something alive. The cover was thick, bound in blackened leather that looked like it had survived centuries. The spine was stiff, the edges frayed, and the pages inside were yellowed with age. But the strangest thing was the feeling it gave me. The second my fingers brushed against its cover, a chill ran through my body, like an invisible force had reached out from the book and touched my soul. I told myself it was just my imagination, the effect of being alone in the dimly lit archive, surrounded by ancient books and the weight of history pressing in on me. But deep down, I knew better. This book was different. It wasn't just an old record of forgotten knowledge. It was something more, something that carried a presence of its own. And when I opened it, I realized I had made a mistake. The first few pages were written in a language I didn't recognize. Strange symbols and elegant script, almost hypnotic in their design. It looked like a mix of Latin, Greek, and something else, something older. Something I couldn't quite place. I flipped through a few more pages, my fingers trembling slightly. Then, suddenly I stopped. The text had changed. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the words forming in front of me. They weren't foreign anymore. They were in English. My regrets, my mistakes, my failures. My hands tightened around the edges of the book as my stomach twisted into knots. Somehow, the book was showing me my own past, a record of everything I had tried to forget, every moment of regret, every bad decision, every missed opportunity. I saw them all laid out before me. I turned another page, and a memory surfaced. It was a cold night in November. I had been sitting in my old apartment, staring at my phone, debating whether to call her back. It was the night my relationship had ended. The night I had let the best thing in my life slip away because of my own pride. I could still remember the way she had sounded on the phone, the hurt in her voice as she asked me one last time if we could fix things. And I had said no. The words in the book mirrored my own thoughts, as if it knew exactly what I was remembering. She called you that night. She waited for you to say something, anything, but you let her go. I turned the page. Another memory. This one from years before, when I had first started my business. I had been offered a partnership, a chance to work with someone who could have changed everything for me. But I had been too stubborn, too caught up in my own ego. I thought I didn't need anyone else. You told yourself you could do it alone, that you didn't need help. But deep down, you knew that wasn't true. You walked away from something that could have been great, and you failed because of it. I slammed the book shut. I was shaking. My hands, my breath. Everything about me felt unstable, like I had just looked into a mirror that reflected my worst fears. What the hell was this book? It wasn't just words on a page. It was something more, something dangerous. I needed to put it back. I needed to forget I had ever seen it. But as I stood there, gripping the book tightly, I heard something. A whisper. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. It wasn't coming from the library or the hallways outside. It was coming from the book. I held my breath, heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, cautiously, I opened the book again. The words were gone. The pages were blank. I flipped through frantically, searching for the text that had just been there. The memories, the regrets, everything had disappeared. It was as if the book had erased itself. And then, as I stared at the empty pages, new words began to appear. You are not the first. You will not be the last. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering in my ears. The past cannot be undone, but it can be rewritten. The words seemed to shimmer, shifting like ink bleeding through the pages. Do you want to change your regrets, Jack? I took a step back, nearly dropping the book. It knew my name. It knew everything. My hands were slick with sweat as I carefully placed the book back on the shelf, stepping away from it as if it might lash out at me. I didn't know what this thing was, but I wanted nothing to do with it. I turned to leave. But then something strange happened. The room shifted. The walls seemed to stretch. The shadows deepened. And suddenly, I wasn't in the library anymore. I was somewhere else. Somewhere familiar. I looked around, my breath catching in my throat. It was my old apartment. The same worn-out couch. The same flickering lamp in the corner. The same cold November night. And sitting there across the room was her. I felt my entire body freeze. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. She was looking at me with those same tired eyes, the ones that had begged me to say something that night. Her voice was soft, uncertain. Jack, are you listening? My mouth went dry. I wanted to move, to say something, but I was paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. This was a memory. No. This was more than a memory. This was a chance. The book had pulled me into the past. I could say something. I could fix this. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. She sighed, just like she had that night, and reached for her phone. I knew what was coming next. She was going to leave. If I didn't stop her, if I didn't change something, she was going to walk out that door just like before. The book's words echoed in my mind. The past cannot be undone, but it can be rewritten. Was this real? Could I really change what had already happened? I forced myself to speak. Wait. Her hand hesitated on the door handle. My heart was hammering so loudly I thought it might burst. But then, as quickly as it had come, the vision shattered. The apartment dissolved around me, and I was back in the library, back in the archives, back with the book of regrets sitting silently in front of me. I gasped for air, my entire body trembling. My hands were clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. It wasn't just a book. It was something much worse. It had given me a glimpse of what could have been, and now I wasn't sure if I could walk away from it. Because if the book was telling the truth, if it really could let me change my past, how could I not take that chance? After my unsettling encounter with the Book of Regrets, I knew I had to speak to someone. There was no way I could make sense of what had just happened on my own. The only person who seemed to have any real authority over the archives was Henry, the head librarian, an older man who carried himself with the quiet, knowing air of someone who had spent a lifetime surrounded by secrets. When I found him the next morning, he was exactly where I expected him to be, sitting at his usual desk near the front of the library, sipping from a chipped coffee mug, staring at an old newspaper as though it held the answers to the universe. I hesitated before speaking. Henry, can I ask you something? He looked up from his paper, his sharp gray eyes scanning me like he already knew what I was about to say. You found it, didn't you? The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, like this was something inevitable, sent a chill through me. I swallowed hard. The book. Henry sighed, setting his mug down with a deliberate slowness. He rubbed his temples, as if suddenly very tired. Which one? I blinked. Wait, there's more than one. Henry didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old, yellowed piece of paper. He slid it across the desk toward me. It was a list of rules. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. The list looked like something you'd find pinned to a wall in an old boarding school. Handwritten neat, but with an eerie, almost frantic quality to the way certain words were underlined. I scanned the first few lines. Rules for working in the university archives. Never open a book if it calls your name. If you hear whispering from the shelves, ignore it. It isn't speaking to you. If a book begins writing by itself, leave the room immediately. Do not read anything written in red ink. It is not ink. If you find a book with blank pages, put it back immediately and leave the archive for the rest of the day. If the lights flicker, do not move. Wait until they stop. Never, under any circumstances, stay in the archives after midnight. If a visitor asks for a book that doesn't exist, do not attempt to find it. Tell them it's unavailable. If you see someone in the mirror that isn't supposed to be there, leave and do not look back. The Book of Regrets does not belong to you. If you take it, it will take something from you in return. I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening around the edges of the paper. You expect me to believe this? Henry met my gaze with an expression that was unreadable, but the weight behind it was impossible to ignore. Believe what you want, Jack. But if you want to stay alive, you'll follow those rules. I almost laughed. Almost. But after what I had seen, after what I had felt, I knew better than to dismiss him outright. Who wrote these? I asked. Henry hesitated before answering. Different people over the years. Librarians before me. Before you? That didn't sit well. Before me? He nodded. This job has a history. People come and go, but the rules stay the same. Some of us follow them. Some don't. I swallowed hard, scanning the list again. The handwriting, though neat, was slightly different in certain places, like the rules had been added one by one over time. Some of the ink was fresh, some old and faded. Why hasn't anyone done anything about it? I asked. If this place is so dangerous, why keep it open? Henry leaned back in his chair and sighed, as if this was a question he had heard too many times before. Because knowledge is dangerous, Jack. Always has been. This library has stood for centuries. The people who run this university, they know what's down there. And they don't care. I stared at him, my pulse quickening. You mean they know about the book? About what it can do? Henry nodded. They know. But they also know that people like you and me, we're disposable. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked back at the rules. Rule number 10 stood out now, bold and glaring. The Book of Regrets does not belong to you. If you take it, it will take something from you in return. I didn't like the way that sounded. I thought back to my experience the night before. The way the book had pulled me into my past, made me relive my worst memories, and dangled the impossible in front of me. It had felt real, too real. And the terrifying part? I'd almost given in. I had almost believed that I could change my past. What does it mean? I asked. That last rule, what does it take? Henry's eyes darkened. That depends on what you regret the most. A cold shiver ran down my spine. He stood up, walked over to the bookshelf behind his desk, and pulled out a thin, worn notebook. He flipped it open and turned it toward me. Inside were names. Dozens of names. Some were crossed out. Others had notes scribbled beside them. One in particular caught my eye. Adrian L. Disappeared after taking the book home. Never seen again. Melissa T. Claimed she changed her past. Went mad 2 weeks later. Victor R. Asked for a second chance. Found dead in the archives. I felt sick. This is real, I whispered. Henry nodded grimly. You're damn right it is. I let out a slow breath. My mind was racing. So what do I do now? Henry studied me carefully before speaking. You stay away from that book. You follow the rules. And if you ever feel like it's watching you, like it wants something from you, you walk away. I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew it was already too late for that. The book had seen me. It had spoken to me. And worst of all, I had listened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. Henry's warnings, the names in that notebook, the way the book had whispered to me. My apartment felt smaller than usual, like the walls were pressing in, and no matter how many times I shut my eyes, I could still see those pages. Do you want to change your regrets, Jack? The words rang in my ears. I forced myself to sit up, rubbing a hand over my face. Then I saw it. The book. It was sitting on my desk. I hadn't brought it home. My entire body went rigid. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. Slowly, hesitantly, I reached toward it. As my fingers brushed the cover, the pages flipped open on their own. New words had appeared. "We're not finished yet." I yanked my hand back like I had been burned. The shadows in my room seemed to stretch, twisting along the walls in unnatural shapes. Something was in here with me, watching, waiting. The rules have been clear. The Book of Regrets does not belong to you. If you take it, it will take something from you in return. But I hadn't taken it. It had taken me, and I had no idea how to stop it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the book. I saw the words shifting on the page, whispering promises, tempting me with the idea that I could rewrite the past. But the worst part wasn't the book. It was the shadows. They were watching me. Even with the lights on, my apartment felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick with something unseen. I could feel it, the weight of a presence lingering just beyond my vision. At first, I thought it was my paranoia playing tricks on me, my mind cracking under the stress of what I had seen. But when I turned my head quickly, I caught it, a flicker of movement, a shape standing in the corner of my room, barely there, like a shadow without a source. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood, watching. I didn't dare look at it directly. My chest tightened, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I forced myself to stay still, to listen. The room was silent, too silent. The hum of my refrigerator, the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards gone. It was like the entire world had held its breath. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow was gone. I was alone again, or so I thought. The first visitor. The next day at work, I tried to shake the feeling that something had followed me from my apartment. The library was bustling with students, the sounds of shuffling papers and clicking keyboards filling the air, but I couldn't focus. Henry had warned me. The book had seen me. And now, I wasn't alone anymore. By the time night fell, I felt a deep exhaustion creeping into my bones. I had been in the archives for hours, sorting through old manuscripts and trying to convince myself that everything was normal, that nothing had changed. But then, the lights flickered. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. Silence. The air grew colder, a sharp drop in temperature that made my breath come out in faint wisps. Something moved in the stacks behind me. I turned my head slowly. There, standing between the bookshelves, was a woman. She was tall, her face partially obscured by the dim light filtering through the windows. Her hair was dark and long, her dress old-fashioned, almost like something out of a Victorian photograph. But her eyes were hollow, empty sockets, black and endless. I couldn't move. She lifted a pale hand and pointed at me. Her lips parted, and a whisper slid through the room, chilling me to my core. "You shouldn't have touched the book." My breath hitched. "Oh, who are you?" The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Then, she took a step forward. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair as I scrambled to put distance between us. But the moment my back hit the wall, the lights flickered again, and she was gone. My chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. I felt like I was drowning in fear, unable to process what I had just seen. But the worst part? I knew she wasn't the only one. The second visitor. That night, I sat in my apartment, clutching a cup of coffee I had no intention of drinking. My hands were shaking. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening to me. So, against my better judgment, I pulled out my laptop and started searching through the university's digital archives. There had to be something. Some mention of the book, the rules, the strange occurrences that plagued this place. But no matter how deep I searched, I found nothing. And then, as if in response to my desperation, the screen of my laptop flickered. At first, I thought it was a glitch. The page I had been looking at disappeared, replaced by a blank screen. Then, slowly, words began to appear. Do you regret it? My fingers froze over the keyboard. Do you regret what you did? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The words changed. You should have answered her. A chill ran through me. She was waiting for you. The lights in my apartment dimmed. My reflection in the laptop screen darkened. And then I saw it. A face. Not mine. It was behind me. I whipped around, knocking my chair over in the process. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. There, standing in the dim glow of the streetlights outside, was a man. Unlike the woman in the library, his face was not hollow. His eyes were very much there, dark, sorrowful, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Anger? I opened my mouth to say something, but the words died in my throat. The man shook his head, and then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. The third visitor. By now, I knew the truth. They weren't hallucinations. They were my mind playing tricks on me. These were the ones who came before me. Librarians, archivists, people who had encountered the book and failed. People who had made the mistake of trying to change their past. And they were trying to warn me. That night, I sat in silence, gripping the arms of my chair, waiting for the next visitor to arrive. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard the whispering. It wasn't coming from my apartment. It was coming from the book. I turned, slowly, my body heavy with dread. There it was sitting on my desk, exactly where I had not left it. The pages fluttered, as if being turned by an invisible hand. And then, a single sentence appeared, written in deep, inky black. It's not too late. I reached forward, hesitating. Was this a warning? Or a temptation? The moment my fingers brushed the pages, the entire room shifted. I was no longer in my apartment. I was standing in the archives. The lights above flickered. The bookshelves loomed around me, stretching into the darkness. And then, the whispering grew louder. Dozens of voices. No, hundreds. I turned, my breath caught in my throat. They were all there. Every librarian, every student, every lost soul who had ever touched the book. They surrounded me, their faces a mixture of fear, regret, and something worse. Desperation. You have to stop it, one of them whispered. It doesn't let go, another murmured. It never lets go. I took a step back. Something was coming. Something bigger. Something worse than all of them. And deep in my bones, I knew. This was just the beginning. I had spent the last few nights convinced I was being watched, haunted by the spectral visitors and their chilling warnings. But none of it compared to the presence that arrived next. The others had been ghosts, echoes of those who had encountered the Book of Regrets before me. But this was something else, something older, something hungry, a presence in the dark. The air shifted in the library that night. It wasn't just the usual eerie silence or the flickering lights. It was a weight pressing down on me, thick and suffocating. I was alone in the lower archives, staring at the shelf where I had last placed the Book of Regrets. My hands trembled at my sides, my heart thudding like a drum. The book was gone. I hadn't touched it since the last time it appeared in my apartment, yet somehow it had vanished. And that meant one of two things. Someone else had taken it, or something had. A low hum filled the space. Not a sound exactly, but a vibration, a deep, pulsing energy that I could feel in my bones. The lights above flickered, then dimmed, casting long, shifting shadows against the stone walls. Then, the whispering began. This time, it wasn't the soft murmurs of the lost souls who had come before me. This was different. The voices overlapped, dozens, then hundreds, all speaking at once. Their words were wrong, not in a language I recognized, not in any human tongue. It was guttural, raw, something primal that clawed at the edges of my mind, threatening to pull me into madness. I clamped my hands over my ears, backing away from the shelves. A shape moved in the darkness beyond the stacks. Tall, thin, watching. I couldn't see its face. Only the long, shadowed figure standing between the bookshelves, its body stretching unnaturally in the dim light. It didn't move toward me, didn't speak. but I could feel it staring, waiting. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a static-like drone. The pressure in my skull intensified, the air thickening until it felt like I was breathing through tar. "Who are you?" I forced the words out, my voice cracking under the weight of the presence. The whisper stopped. Silence fell. Then, in a voice unlike anything I had ever heard, it spoke. "You already know." The words weren't spoken aloud. They pressed into my mind, slithering through my thoughts like an infestation. The sound was cold, jagged, filled with something inhuman. The shape moved, not with footsteps. There was no sound of shifting fabric, no weight pressing against the floor. It simply glided closer, its form twisting like ink bleeding through water. A single word carved itself into my brain, like a blade slicing through my thoughts. Regret. My vision blurred. The room around me warped, the walls stretching and breathing like they were alive. I stumbled, gripping the nearest bookshelf to steady myself. The shadows thickened, curling around my feet like living things. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. The shape loomed closer. "I have been waiting for you, Jack." How did it know my name? I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My breath came in short gasps, panic setting in like ice in my veins. "You think you have a choice. You do not." The lights died, plunging the archive into complete darkness. Then for the first time I saw it, the thing inside the book, the true face of regret. It was no longer just a shadow. It had form. It stood impossibly tall, its body wrapped in a cloak that seemed made of swirling darkness. Its face was a void, shifting between nothingness and glimpses of something terrible. Eyes that did not belong to it, mouths that opened and closed without making a sound. And then I realized it wasn't one entity. It was many, a mass of lost souls, twisted together, bound in eternal torment. The regret of every person who had ever touched the book. I could hear them inside it, screaming, whispering, crying out for release. "Do you want to change your past?" The voice came again, curling around me, suffocating. It wanted me to say yes. It needed me to, because once I did, once I made the choice, I would belong to it. A battle for my soul. I fought to move, to pull away from the thing that stood inches from me. My hands gripped the bookshelf so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I can take it all away." The words slid through my mind like poison. The guilt, the mistakes, the moments you wish you could undo. A memory forced itself into my head. Her face, the one I had let go, the one I had hurt. I saw her standing at the door, waiting for me to say something, anything. I had let her leave, and I had regretted it every day since. "What if you could go back?" the voice whispered. The shadows pressed tighter, coiling around my wrists, my throat. "What if you could fix it?" My breath hitched. For a moment, just a moment, I considered it. What if I could change it? What if I could take back the words I never should have said? What if I could undo my worst mistakes? The shadows thickened, sensing my hesitation. And then I saw them, the others, the spectral visitors, the ones who had come before me. They stood in the periphery, their hollow eyes watching with desperate urgency. One of them, a young man in tattered clothes, his face half gone, stepped forward. He shook his head. "Don't listen." The shadows shuddered. The entity snarled. For the first time, it seemed to lose patience. "You cannot run from this, Jack." I clenched my jaw. My mind was spinning. I could feel it pulling at me, dragging me toward a decision that could not be undone. I had a choice. I could give in. I could let it take me, change everything, rewrite my regrets. Or I could break free. I squeezed my eyes shut and whispered the only word I could manage. "No." The entity screamed. The shadows lashed out, burning my skin with an unbearable cold. The walls shook, the bookshelves rattled, and then I was falling backward, through the darkness, through the noise, through time itself. I hit the floor of the archive hard, gasping, my lungs burning as if I had been drowning. The shadows were gone. The presence had vanished. The book lay in front of me, closed, still, and on its cover, written in blood-red ink, was a single word: denied. I exhaled, my hands shaking violently. I had survived, but I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The book should have been destroyed. After everything I had been through, the whispers, the spectral visitors, the thing inside the book, I had thought I had won, that denying it would be enough. But the moment I woke up in my apartment the next morning, I knew the truth. I hadn't escaped. I had merely delayed the inevitable. A message from the other side. I didn't remember how I got home. One moment, I was lying on the cold stone floor of the archives, gasping for breath, and the next, I was in my bed, staring at my ceiling like none of it had ever happened. But the scratches on my arms, the lingering ache in my bones, the deep sense of unease in my gut told me otherwise. I forced myself up, every muscle screaming in protest, and rubbed the exhaustion from my eyes. I needed to talk to Henry. He was the only one who might have some answers. But as I reached for my phone, I froze. There was something on my desk. A note. I hadn't left it there. Slowly, cautiously, I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, as if it had been sitting in some forgotten corner of the library for decades. And written in the same deep red ink I had seen in the Book of Regrets, there was a single message. You saw too much. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed the paper, turning it over, looking for anything, any clue as to who had left it. But there was nothing else. Just those 3 words. A warning, or maybe a threat. Henry's final warning. I found Henry in the library's back office, his face lined with exhaustion, a deep weariness in his gray eyes. You're lucky to be alive, he muttered the moment I walked in. I tossed the note onto his desk. Care to explain this? Henry barely glanced at it before sighing. You touched it, didn't you? I clenched my jaw. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Henry said. I leaned forward. Then tell me, Henry, what the hell is that thing inside the book? What does it want? And why did it come for me? Henry studied me carefully, then rubbed a hand over his face, as if debating whether or not to tell me the truth. Finally, he spoke. There are books in this world that were never meant to be read, he said quietly. Books that aren't written by human hands. A chill ran down my spine. Then what wrote it? Henry shook his head. Nobody knows. Some say the Book of Regrets is as old as time itself, that it has existed in different forms, under different names, always finding those who are most vulnerable. And those who open it, they pay the price. I swallowed hard. And what price is that? Henry hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, themselves. I felt the weight of the words settle over me like a suffocating fog. They become part of it, Henry continued, trapped between the pages, reliving their regrets over and over. That's why the book knows you, Jack. That's why it speaks to you. I shook my head, stepping back. No, that's not possible. I said no. I denied it. Henry's gaze darkened. You think that matters? I stared at him. The book doesn't give up, he said. It doesn't care how strong you are. Once it sees you, once it marks you, it will always be there. Waiting, a sinking feeling settled in my gut. So what do I do? I asked. Henry sighed, looking down at his desk. I don't know, he admitted. No one who's seen what you have has ever truly been free of it. I gritted my teeth. Then I'll burn it. Henry looked up sharply. You think no one has tried that? I faltered. It comes back, Henry said, his voice flat. Always. I felt sick. What if I leave? I asked. What if I just walk away from all of this? Henry leaned forward. You can try. I didn't like the way he said that. The book's final move. That night, I packed my bags. If Henry was right, if the book would never stop, I needed to get as far away from it as possible. I threw what I could into a suitcase, barely thinking about what I was taking. My only goal was to leave the city before the book could reach me again. But just as I zipped up my bag, the lights in my apartment flickered. I went still. Slowly, I turned toward my desk. And there it was, sitting right where I had never put it. The Book of Regrets. The pages were open. And this time, they weren't blank. A new entry had appeared. It was my name, followed by a sentence that made my stomach drop. Running will not save you, Jack. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. Then, in front of my eyes, the ink began to move. New words appeared. You were meant to finish this story. The floor beneath me felt unsteady, the walls pressing in, the air thick with something unseen. I had spent weeks trying to escape, trying to resist the pull of the book. But the truth was, it was never going to let me go. Not until I made a choice. The final decision. I had two options. I could run, like Henry said, try to leave, try to ignore the fact that the book would never stop following me. Or I could finish what I started. I took a deep breath. Then, with shaking hands, I stepped forward. I picked up the book. The second my fingers touched the cover, a new page flipped open. The final question appeared. Do you want to change your regrets? I exhaled sharply. I knew what the book wanted. It wanted me to give in, to believe in the illusion it had shown me, to take its offer and rewrite my past. But I also knew the truth. Regret isn't something you erase. It isn't something you bargain with. It's something you carry. And so, gripping the book tightly, I made my choice. No, the book screamed. A guttural, ancient wail of something that had just lost its prey. The apartment shook. The lights exploded, casting the room in darkness. The walls trembled, the air crackled, and I felt something tear away from me, as if the book itself had been latched onto my soul, waiting to sink its hooks in deeper. Then, silence. I looked down. The book was gone. Not burned, not torn apart, just gone, as if it had never been there in the first place. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew one thing. I had won. For now. The book was gone, but the weight of it remained. I stood in the wreckage of my apartment, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. The lights had burst, glass shards littering the floor, the walls still vibrating with whatever unnatural force had just been expelled. The air smelled of burnt paper, though there were no ashes, no remains of the Book of Regrets. Had I truly escaped, or had I simply delayed the inevitable? I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed my half-packed suitcase, threw the rest of my belongings inside without thinking, and headed for the door. I needed to leave. Now. A town that won't let go. The streets were empty as I sped down the highway, the glow of streetlights flashing against the windshield. I didn't have a plan, didn't have a destination. I just knew I needed to get as far away from this place as possible. The weight of the book had lifted, but the fear remained. I had seen too much, learned too much, and now I wasn't sure if my mind would ever be at peace again. But as I reached the city limits, something felt wrong. The air grew thick. The night stretched unnaturally, as if the darkness refused to release me. And then, the road looped back on itself. My stomach dropped as I passed the same gas station I had driven by 10 minutes ago. No, 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 no. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself to focus. I had taken one road out of town, a straight shot to the interstate. There was no possible way I should be back here. But I was. The highway had reset. I slowed the car, my hands slick with sweat, my breath coming fast. Then I saw it. Standing beneath the flickering neon gas station sign was a figure. A tall, thin silhouette. Motionless. Watching me. I didn't stop. Didn't look too closely. I just slammed my foot on the gas, speeding past it, my pulse hammering. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, the figure moved. It turned toward me. And in the reflection, I saw its face. My own. The final trap. I drove for hours. Or maybe minutes. Time didn't feel real anymore. The highway twisted and looped, a never-ending circle trapping me in the town that had already taken so much. Every time I tried a different route, a different exit, I somehow ended up back where I started. And the longer I drove, the more wrong the world became. The street lights flickered in an unnatural rhythm. The gas station clerk stared at me, unblinking, from behind the counter, never moving. The town had become a loop, a ghostly echo of itself. a prison. And I knew this wasn't the town anymore. This was the book. It was still with me, and I had just stepped deeper inside it. The final choice. I pulled the car to a stop in front of the library, my mind racing. If I was still inside the book's grasp, then running was pointless. I had one last choice. I could either accept my fate, let the book take me, let it rewrite my regrets into a past I could never truly escape, or I could face it, destroy it, for good. I pushed open the car door, stepping out into the cold night air. The library loomed before me, its ancient stonework stretching toward the sky, the arched windows glowing faintly from the dim lights inside. It felt alive now, like it was waiting. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The final confrontation. The library was empty, silent. Even the usual hum of electricity, the faint rustling of unseen movements, gone. I walked past the front desk, past the rows of bookshelves, descending into the lower archives, my steps echoing unnaturally in the vast, hollow space. And there, waiting for me on the central table, was the Book of Regrets. I wasn't surprised. It was always going to end this way. The book was open, its pages shifting as if caught in an invisible breeze. The ink bled across the paper, forming words I knew were meant just for me. You cannot run, Jack. I clenched my fists. I'm not running anymore. The pages turned. Then make your choice. A deep hum filled the room, the same unnatural vibration I had felt before. The shadows thickened, curling at the edges of the archive like a living thing. The book was giving me one last chance, one last temptation. Rewrite my regrets, change the past, lose myself in the illusion of what could have been, or end this. I reached into my pocket, my fingers wrapping around the lighter I had carried with me. The book's pages fluttered violently, as if sensing my intent. The whispers grew frantic, overlapping voices filling the air, pleading. You don't understand. We can help you. You will never escape. I flicked the lighter open. The flame danced in the darkness, small but absolute. I met the book's shifting ink, its twisting words that tried to form one last plea. Please. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the flame onto the pages. Fire consumed the book instantly, the ancient paper curling into blackened ash. The entire library shuddered, the walls groaning, the air thick with smoke and whispers that turned into screams. The shadows lashed out, clawing at my skin, at my mind, trying to pull me back. But I held firm. The book burned. The whispers faded. The darkness collapsed. And then, everything went silent. Freedom, at a cost. When I opened my eyes, I was outside. The library was gone. Not just the flames, the entire building. The sky was a soft shade of gray, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. The town was normal again. No looping roads, no unnatural figures watching from the shadows. I took a deep, shuddering breath. It was over. I had won. But as I turned to walk toward my car, I caught my reflection in the window of a nearby shop, and I froze. There was something missing. The reflection was me, but hollow. My eyes were duller, like something had been taken. I swallowed hard. Maybe Henry was right. Maybe no one ever truly escapes. Maybe the Book of Regrets had left a piece of itself inside me. I turned away from the reflection, gripping my car keys tightly. I didn't care. I was free, or at least free enough. And for now, that would have to be enough.